started within the next 2 minutes. We have a few folks still signing up. Thank you for your patience. We look forward to discussing the webinar on addressing mobile application security. Okay, thanks for your patience. Looks like we're going to get started here on the fourth webinar of our series around mobility. Today we're going to talk about addressing mobile application security. Thank you for joining today. I understand clearly how busy each one of you are, and I hope that you find some value in this time spent with us here at Mobile Reach. We're going to get started and kind of just go over kind of a directive for today's call. We're going to start off with an introduction and then move through the process to understanding the enterprise environment, the security concerns around enterprise mobility, and highlight on the areas that is important when looking at the security issues around enterprise mobility. And we're also going to address some specific concerns around what we would consider a trend movement around HTML5 and some things that we could take away from what to remember from the today's webinar. And then we'll go into any of the questions that you post and wrap up today's webinar. And please feel free to ask anything. This is an informative session, education-based session, and we're here to share the knowledge in which we have experienced being in this space for over 10 years. So I'd like to start off with the introduction. And basically, what I'd like to talk about is this is security, is by far most important when it comes to the enterprise mobility adoption challenge. And it says here for CIOs, but I think for all of us, we see in the marketplace today that the security is an issue, whether you're big, you're small, whether you're commercial, your government, education. Security is a very, very, very important challenge in today's marketplace. And based on a recent survey, we pulled some statistics that we'd like to reference here. And the survey was a 2012 information security breaches survey, and we found it quite informative, but at the same time alarming, that basically only 4 out of every 10 large organizations even take the steps necessary to encrypt their data, download it to any type of iPhone, tablet, smart device, BlackBerry, Droid, and even more so, 38% of the large businesses, they don't have any kind of program educating their staff about the security risks of mobility and the issues around it. So, and it even falls down to the 26% of the respondents with security policy believe that their staff have a very good understanding of it, but yet 21% think that the level of staff understanding is poor. I think that remains to be seen. As we progress through this presentation, you'll see how we talk about looking at the security as a layered approach. And we'll talk more about in detail of that. To continue on the introduction, we want to talk about it's crucial to have the right policy and tools in place. A lot of times in our industry, let's run out and buy the next greatest piece of software or technology that can make us successful without putting the policies and procedures and processes in place to fulfill and actually benefit and utilize the technology as efficient as possible. The implementation of a clear mobile security policy, without question, will contribute to the success. And as new technology evolves, it becomes useful for solving problems, such as a great secure application platform, an MDM, etc. However, securing mobile apps from the ground up is key, with the right policies, the right procedures in place to ensure that all bases are covered. So as we move into this presentation, Nasrin Azari, president of Mobile Reach, she's been in the space for over 20 years. She'll be speaking about the security aspects around mobile and enterprise applications. And it goes all the way back to 1996, I think it was, when Nazrin did her master's thesis on mobile computing. I think about that, 1996. Today, you know, mobile is where it is, but even only a year or two ago, you know, we would have to spend hours just talking to our clients, this is something you really need to do. Today, it's not even a consideration. Whether you're commercial, in your industry or government, you have a need or initiative or some type of knowledge direction around trying to deploy the proper mobile strategy for your organization. And today, we're going to focus on, with Nazrin's knowledge, on the most important aspect of that, and that is security. So we're going to move into the next slide, and I would like to introduce Nazrin Azari, President of Mobile Reach.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks, Bob. I appreciate the introduction. And good afternoon to everybody. I appreciate you joining our webinar today on enterprise mobile security. So for those of you that have attended these sessions before, you know that I focus a lot on the business to employee aspect of enterprise mobility, and we'll continue that trend today because what we're looking at is we're looking at it from a corporate perspective. And so if I'm sitting up in an organization and I'm thinking about my environment and my mobile workers and all the information that's passing back and forth between my enterprise environment and my workers out in the field, I'm concerned about the data. I'm concerned about the security of the information that goes outside of my four walls. But the thing that we have to think about is that there's a balance here, because as Bob mentioned, there is, and as you all know, you're all in this space, enterprise mobility has a huge potential for reward or great efficiency benefits in your organization, and you want to be able to take advantage of those. The important thing is to make sure that you take advantage of those in a secure fashion. And it is concerning when you look at a lot of organizations today that put the tools and the technology in place without necessarily thinking through the risks and the security concerns. And we've all heard stories and read the news of security breaches at organizations, and it's very difficult to recover from those things. So it's really important that you think about enterprise mobile security up front. And think about it in a very methodical and strategic way that's going to be relevant to your own organization. And certainly, taking advantage of technology, there are some things that benefits. There's some security benefits that you can actually achieve with technology, but as we all know, introducing technology into your environment also requires careful thought, and you need to make sure that you manage all that. So we're going to go through some very specific things to think about when incorporating an enterprise mobile solution into your environment, all related to security, making sure you're keeping your data and your environment secure. We'll talk specifically about the risks with using HTML5, because as Bob mentioned, that is certainly a trend. There's a lot of folks that are using HTML5 to develop mobile applications in the environment, and we want to be aware of the risks associated with that. And we'll close up with the Mobile Reach approach. So we'll talk a little bit about how Mobile Reach addresses the security concerns that we'll talk about today. We're not going to go into a lot of detail, but if you're interested in learning more, certainly please get in touch with us and we can schedule a more detailed presentation for you, including a product demonstration as well. So this picture here, this diagram, is a little bit busy, and I do apologize for that. It was intended to be one of those layered diagrams, but that just doesn't work too well in a WebEx session. But the bottom line here is that when you think about a mobile application as a worker or as a mobile employee, you think about your device. You've got your phone, you've got your handheld device, you have your application running on that device. You bring up the app, you run it. What's important to know is that there's a lot going on behind that. So you're in your mobile environment, but what you're doing is you're connecting back into an enterprise environment. And if you look at this picture on the left-hand side, that represents your enterprise environment. You've got your network, you've got lots of workers in the environment that are working within the four walls, you've got data, some of it's proprietary, confidential, information that is sensitive, and sensitive means that if it got into the wrong hands or if it were exposed, that there would be consequences, unpleasant consequences for the organization. And that's something as leaders and as mobility experts and strategists, we all need to be aware of what those risks are and be able to mitigate those risks before we create an environment that will introduce those risks. So in the mobile environment, once you leave the four walls, you've got a mobile device in your hands. It's very easy to lose that device, have it, you misplace it, have somebody else could pick it up. Typically, somebody else that picks up your device doesn't really care about the enterprise information that's on there, but it's still important to keep it secure. So those types of things are important. So what I've done here is I've identified four areas of concern in this environment. So number one is, as information is pulled out of the enterprise environment onto your mobile device, there's a chance that some really, really smart network hacker sitting on that line listening in to the data that's transferring from the enterprise network onto your mobile device so that you can do your work. And so we want to be able to mitigate against that, losing that data or exposing that information to somebody that may be listening that is not authorized to access the information that's being transferred. Secondly, once data is on your mobile device, then you're at risk of exposure there as well. Again, if you lose the device or if somebody happens to be looking over your shoulder, those types of things, you want to be able to protect any sensitive information that you actually store or use on the device. Thirdly, you may have an unauthorized person in the mobile environment, someone that is not an employee of your company even, that has access now to your application. And if you set your phone down, for example, somebody else picks it up, they may have an interest in the information that's in that application even though they're not authorized to use it. So that's important to protect against that as well. And finally, a very important concern is ensuring that a hacker isn't able to penetrate your enterprise environment by piggybacking on data that's streaming between the mobile environment and the enterprise environment. So that's another concern. So this represents kind of the top four concerns around security, and this just puts it all into perspective. It is a very complicated environment, and there are a lot of concerns. And the other thing about this is that the concerns aren't visible. You can't always see when something's going amiss, when data is being compromised. You don't actually always see it. And so sometimes we're oblivious to that. So what's important? Your organization cares about two things: protecting enterprise data in the hands, as data is moved from the enterprise environment out to the mobile environment, that data needs to be protected from unauthorized access. And so what you want to think about when you're thinking about how to protect that data is how sensitive is it, first of all, and what happens if it gets into the wrong hands or into a malicious environment. What could happen? What are the risks as an organization? What does the organization face or have to lose if the information is compromised? And the second thing is that the organization cares about is keeping malicious users or programs or viruses out of the corporate network, which could harm the performance of internal applications and processes and harm the environment. So how do we limit those threats, and then how do we minimize the damage? If there is a breach, how do we minimize the damage? And there's a lot of tools that we'll talk about today and procedures and processes that you can implement as an organization to protect yourselves from these threats. And that's all very, very critical to do that before you embark on a serious enterprise-wide mobile strategy. So in terms of implementing security, what you want to do is as you implement a mobile strategy, you want to incorporate security concerns into that strategy. They should probably be first and foremost when you're thinking about designing your enterprise mobile solution. So think about what happens. Your end users, your mobile users, are going to lose their devices. You just count on it. So what you need to think about beforehand is what happens if and when a user loses a device. How do you prevent the sensitive information on that device from being exposed to unauthorized access? And how do you prevent an unauthorized user from getting onto that device, picking it up, and being able to access applications that they shouldn't be using? And then how do you prevent malicious users or applications, viruses from entering your environment? You have to protect your environment from that. And then, finally, you need to protect, the corporate entity cares about the legal ramifications of data exposure and viruses and things like that. So how does the corporation protect itself from threats associated with security breaches? And then if we dig deeper into mobile applications themselves, so the reason that you have mobile users out in the field, out of your environment, is because they're running mobile applications on their device to help them perform their job. And what you need to think about when those applications are being developed is what is the sensitive information that those applications require. So identifying what that sensitive information is, and the other thing is when you design the processes, sometimes what we do as application designers is, in order for things to be easy for us, we just push all information. For example, if a mobile user is performing a survey and needs to capture information, what we might do as an organization is we might ship down a whole lot of information onto the device that the end user doesn't really need to do their job, and so that puts sensitive information at risk of exposure when it doesn't really need to be there. So really think through the processes of what you're trying to accomplish with your mobile application, and think about whether or not that data, the sensitive data, even needs to be a part of it. And in most cases, there does need to be some. What you want to do, the goal here is to minimize the amounts and the criticality of that information that's on the mobile device, because anything that's on the mobile device has higher risk of exposure. So what do you do with the sensitive information that is transferred onto the device? Well, you must encrypt it. So it must be encrypted over the air and while it's at rest on the mobile device. And if we think about that picture that I had up a couple of slides ago, that protects, if you've got folks that are listening into the transport, or folks that pick up the device and copy information off the device, if it's encrypted, it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to access the data. So encryption is crucial, very, very important. There's a lot of different levels of encryption that can be employed, and those are things that you need to think about as an organization. But the bottom line is that all data that's transferred or at rest on a device that's enterprise grade should be encrypted. And then the other thing is the people factor too. So you've got your mobile users out in the field, and they need to know what they need to do if they realize that they've lost their device or they've compromised secure data. Just like today, if you've got somebody that's carrying around a paper file that's critical, what do they do when they lose it? If they lose it, there's certain procedures that are put in place to minimize the damage caused by the loss of that data. And you have to think about electronic data in the same fashion. But the nice thing about this is you can put procedures in place to detect, for users to detect inform the organization when they've detected a breach, and then you can use capabilities like remotely wiping the device, tracking the device so you know where it is if the device does get lost. So sort of in summary here, your mobile strategy must include security policies and procedures for the people that includes your mobile users, and includes your managers, and includes your educators. Bob talked a little bit about how important educating the community about security procedures is. It's very important, and that needs to be included. You need network security policies to control access to your environment. That's very, very important. Mobile device management is crucial as well. That's to manage your mobile devices at work. It's about provisioning, it's about maintenance, it's about controlling what applications are on which devices and who has access to those. So there's a huge amount of capabilities in that one little bullet point right there. Data risk analysis on your mobile applications, that's something that we just talked about a little bit, is analyzing the sensitive information and what the risks are associated with exposure of that sensitive information. And then finally, when you do have sensitive data, how do you protect it? And all those things are important and need to be addressed in your mobile strategy. So I'm just going to quickly kind of go through these and bottom line them. So in the people factor, what's important is clear and consistent rules and processes across the organization. And those processes need to incorporate things like the bring your own device requirements. There's a lot of organizations that are allowing people to bring devices into the office so that they can do their jobs using a device that they also use for their personal life. And that's really, it's an advantage for the mobile users, it's an advantage for the corporation, but there have to be policies put in place. For example, if you are an employee and you brought your own device to work to do your job and you happen to be out in the field, you happen to be collecting information that happens to be sensitive, you lose your device, well, your organization is likely going to want you to and should ask you to sign a consent form that will allow them to remotely access your device and wipe it clean in case you lose it. And this is important for you to know because some tools will allow you to separate your business data from your personal data, but others won't. So it's important for you as an individual to know, what does that mean to you? How is that going to affect your personal information? So you need to have instructions. People need to have instructions on how to handle sensitive and confidential information, regardless of what form it's in. But what they need to understand is that if they're using a mobile application, they need to treat that as sensitive and confidential information, just like a file that is, a paper file that's very sensitive. That's treated with care. So does the mobile application that has sensitive information in it. That also needs to be treated with care. Reporting lost and stolen devices, authentication, that needs to be incorporated into the system, being able to, how you're supposed to use mobile applications, et cetera, et cetera. And, obviously, another thing that's very important is for users to know what happens if they don't comply to the requirements. Because there's a couple, there's all the great technology, but really at the end of the day, it's the people are involved too, and people make mistakes, and they've got to be, processes have to incorporate that as well. So in terms of network security, the bottom line there is to protect your network from unauthorized access. So you want to protect your enterprise network, your enterprise information and applications. You want to protect that from allowing unauthorized access by folks into the environment. And really, there's no difference when you're incorporating a mobile environment and mobile devices into your environment. But really, this problem has been around for decades. There's security analysts that focus on network security, and you've got to secure your network today from threats via web access and things like that. We need to do the same thing for mobile devices. So it's really not a whole lot of difference there, but it's important that you think about it from a mobile perspective. Mobile device management, very specific to enterprise mobility here. Again, this is all about managing and controlling all your mobile devices and how they're used outside in the mobile environment. And this goes from everything from remotely wiping those devices to upgrading mobile applications and provisioning applications on those devices, et cetera. So risk analysis is one of the things that I think is probably the most overlooked and perhaps one of the most important facets of enterprise mobile security. And the whole goal here is to understand what data is sensitive and to minimize the risk of exposing sensitive information while maintaining the operational effectiveness and the gains that you get from incorporating a mobile solution. Because there's a huge amount of benefit to equipping your mobile users with devices that enable them to do their jobs more effectively, and you don't want to minimize that by putting such heavy restrictions in place that they're no longer as a mobile user, they're no longer effective. So it's important. So I kind of come up with these steps in order to analyze the risk, identify the data that's going to be used by the mobile applications, and understand how sensitive it is. It goes back to those previous questions. What happens if the data gets exposed? What's the risk to the organization? Map out processes for your mobile users and really think about whether sensitive information is required for the mobile user to do their job effectively. And then once you've minimized the sensitive data on that device, you implement data protection measures to protect data and minimize the risk of the data being accessed by unauthorized users so that it doesn't get exposed. So in terms of protecting sensitive data, how do you do that? Again, encryption is a must, and encryption is required both during over-the-air transmission and at rest. So a lot of, there's layers of security. You have your network security, you've got your data transport security. It's really important that your mobile applications also include security measures and encryption, because otherwise your application data, even though it may be in an encrypted wrapper, the data itself, once it gets to the application, to the end, on the device itself, it's no longer encrypted and it's not protected anymore. So you should be required to encrypt all application data. Also, so the two things that are important are encryption and authentication. It's important that all the users that have access to mobile applications are authorized to use those applications. And related to that all your passwords, all of that, password information needs to be encrypted on the device if it's stored. Any other authentication criteria should be encrypted on the device as well, so that somebody can't access your device, get your authentication criteria, and execute an application or access an application that they don't really have access to by pretending they're you. So that's critically important. The bottom line here is that what you want to do is make it very, very difficult or impossible for an unauthorized user to hack into your system and access data that they're not authorized to have access to. So so stepping back and thinking about technology itself, one of the things that I talk about quite a bit when I talk about mobile applications, developing mobile applications, and how to create effective mobile apps, I talk about process. And the fact of the matter is that if you have mobile applications in your environment for your employees, those applications are driven by a business need, and that business need the business need is going to be all wrapped around improving some process, whether it's making mobile workers more efficient, whether it's making them more productive, whether it's making the data that they capture more complete. So there's a lot of ways you can define it better in terms of the process, but in general, you're improving a process. And in a lot of cases, what you're doing is you're improving a paper-based process, and you're turning that into an electronic process by using a mobile device and by using electronic tools. And so one of the things to think about is that and I've got some examples here that I'll go through in a minute. But, one of those examples is think about that survey worker that's performing a survey. So the process for that survey worker is to track information about a piece of equipment or about some event. They want to capture information about that and create a survey. What they're doing today is they're doing that on paper. When they incorporate a mobile solution, they're using a mobile device, they're scanning in information, they're tracking information using electronic forms, all more efficient than doing it on pen and paper. And so once you do that and you're transferring information over the air, you think about that as being a security risk, but what you're doing is you're replacing a process that's existing that already has inherently in it a security risk, and that is that the data that you're capturing is either on paper or it's captured electronically. And either way, that data itself is out there. And actually, if you've got the data out there on paper, that's probably a bigger security risk because it's you can't encrypt data that's written on a piece of paper. And once you lose that paper or that file that may be very, very critical, you can't reach out into the air and get out there and make it disappear or make it go away. So there are some ways that technology actually improves the security of your operations, and that's important to think about. So here's in terms of some specific ways that technology helps. You can visually hide data. Think about when you're typing in a password on a request on a form and how it will hide that password by using asterisks to cover the letters that you type. So that's a way of protecting the data so that somebody looking over your shoulder doesn't have access to your password. Encrypting data, putting it in a format that nobody can read without a password. Requiring authentication for access versus, if somebody picks up your mobile device and tries to access information, they have to enter your password in order to do that, and they probably don't know your password. Whereas if you dropped a file that had critical information in it, somebody picked it up and they could just open it up and read it. So in terms of considerations, the security considerations with electronic data is that it does need to be encrypted for it to be protected. So in terms of some examples, if you're a nurse capturing patient information, if you're using a form and a clipboard, that text is easy to be seen and accessed. If you're using a mobile device, the text can be encrypted and the form can have some capabilities in it to protect the data as well. So again, technology can be used to assist in the protection of data as well as needing to be secured itself. So what are some components of what we would consider a secure application? And this is going to be a little bit repetitive here because these things are very important. Authentication of users accessing the application, that's critical. So also, as the application is sitting there on the device, if as a user you set that device down and the application is running, after a certain amount of time you're going to want that application to lock up so that the user is forced to enter their password again. And so it's important to incorporate that into your mobile application. And it's important, again, to encrypt all data and also to handle errors in a thorough fashion. That's often an area where mobile applications, regardless, or software applications, regardless of whether they're mobile or not, run into trouble is in the lack of adequate error handling. And that's really, really important. And then finally, if you're a mobile application developer and you're thinking about how can I build a secure mobile application, one important thing, make sure that you're not depending on code that's not trustworthy. And if it's from a source that you don't know, if it's a third party that you don't have a good understanding of that code or doesn't have a good reputation, or it's from some source that frankly you don't trust, don't use it, because you're risking incorporating an application or building an application that is not secure. So that brings us to some of the dependencies or some of the security issues with HTML, because a lot of folks, HTML5 is getting a lot of attention, and it's a way, really the benefit of HTML5 is the ability to write an application, have it run in the browsers on mobile devices, which allows you to write an application once, and it can run on Android devices, it can run on iOS devices, it can run on BlackBerry devices, it can run on Windows mobile phones, and anything that happens to run a browser. So it's a very, very attractive way of building applications. But the problem with it is that as it's dependent on browsers, there's some security risks associated with the whole architecture around HTML applications. And there's a lot of, folks have seen the news and can see there's a lot of situations where there's hacking into browsers. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that the standards aren't up to par at this point, and the new standards aren't due out until 2014, which gives us a couple of years where the standards are not up to expectations or up to what we would consider acceptable for enterprise-grade applications. So again, there's holes in HTML5 that leave your systems and your applications vulnerable, and so this is something that you have to think about pretty carefully when you think about what data is being incorporated into your applications, what processes are being implemented via these applications. You really want to ensure that the risks, that you balance out the functionality with the risks of the vulnerability of the applications that you're writing on this platform. And so one of the things that is concerning here is the fact that in terms of trends, you know, the common thought is that HTML5 is going to continue to become more and more popular, I should say, or more and more used. And as it makes it a very attractive platform for hackers themselves. And so it is a concern, and what we recommend is for organizations that have a high concern about the security of the data in their enterprise applications, at this point, HTML5 is probably not the right solution for those types of applications, based on all the existing knowledge to this point. So in terms of the Mobile Reach approach, how does Mobile Reach approach enterprise mobility, and how do we address some of these concerns? So first of all, the Splitware Mobility Platform, which is our mobility platform, was built way back in year 2000. So the platform's been around for 12 years. And you know, at that point in time, enterprise mobility was in its infancy. I mean, it's still quite a young technology or field, but back then, obviously, it was really, really in its infancy. And so we built a lot of functionality into our platform to ensure security from end to end. And certainly we encrypt data. As the encryption standards have increased, we've also increased the encryption component of our platform. And currently we encrypt up to the 256-bit encryption AES standard. And another thing to note is that this is probably the third revision of encryption in the product, meaning that it's very easy, or relatively easy, to scale that up. So when the next encryption standard comes out, we guarantee that we'll have the ability to support it. All the software in our platform is built in-house. You know, over the course of the last 10 years, we don't depend on any third-party components, and this is critical. And a lot of our customers operate in secure environments. We've got customers in the Department of Defense. We've got customers in healthcare, and you know, so we're very familiar with the concerns around data security and how important that is throughout the application. So we built our platform to provide native applications, and we have not yet adopted HTML5 standards for the reasons I mentioned in the previous slides, because of the security risks that exist with that technology at this time. So what we have is a native application platform that supports all sorts of additional security features, such as fingerprint scanning, retina scanning for authentication, you know, and any kind of device features that need to be accessed by a device we can do with a native application. So that allows us to provide a very, very tight, secure application for our customers that need it. Another thing that's incorporated is that, so what we do is we have a cache on the device, and what we do is we encrypt all the data in that database. The other thing, you know, one of the risks involved with caching data onto a mobile device is the concern that somebody could lift that data off the device and you know, and access it from a different computer or a different computer or a different method. And we put controls in place to prevent that our database that we use for applications, to prevent that from being picked up by the general purpose backup facilities that are common on a variety of mobile devices. And that's good because that protects our data from being picked up when we don't really want it to be picked up. And of course, authentication is incorporated throughout the system. We actually integrate with authentication facilities in your enterprise environment. So, for example, if you have extended a SQL application out to your mobile users, we will require the user ID and password that user is required to use for that SQL-based application, and require them to enter that on the mobile device as well. So they don't need to have two separate passwords. So those are some of the things that we incorporate into our platform to ensure that we can provide the highest level of security possible for our customers. In terms of very specific security requirements, if you have questions about anything in particular, or you have specific requirements, please don't hesitate to ask, because there are things that I wasn't able to cover everything here, and there's a lot of flexibility in the platform to cover needs that are not already part of the foundation package. So in terms of what does our security look like, well, this kind of shows you how our platform encrypts data between the enterprise environment. The data comes through what we call our splitware server, which is the enterprise side of our platform, and encrypts all the data out to mobile devices, whether they're inside the firewall within the corporate environment, or whether they're outside the firewall in the mobile environment. And all the encryption that Mobile Reach Splitware puts onto into the application is above and beyond any encryption or any data protection capabilities that already exist within your infrastructure. And you probably do have some of that in your infrastructure, and we complement that with additional security and encryption as well. So back to that list of questions that I put up earlier in the presentation, I just want to go through the checklist and talk about some of the things that I referenced during the presentation to address those concerns. So first of all, what happens if a user loses his or her mobile device? What should happen is that once the device sits idle for a certain amount of time, the mobile application that's running on the device locks itself and requires a password by a user that picks it up. So if the user, a worker loses his device, somebody else picks it up, they're not able to access the application, they're not able to see the application, they're not able to access any of the data that's within that application. If there is a concern that the device has been compromised and is in an environment where you need to wipe the data, then you've got the capability to wipe that data via your device management. Your MDM solution should have the capability to remotely wipe the data on that device if it is lost and can't be found. And then in terms of how do you prevent sensitive or confidential information from being exposed, encryption is the answer to that. You should encrypt all sensitive data, all passwords, anything that you don't want folks to have access to. And then in terms of preventing unauthorized users from accessing the device, again, that goes back to the authentication procedures that you have in place. And in terms of how do you prevent malicious users or a virus or applications, really that's the same as any network today. You really need to have network security software in place to detect and prevent hackers or malicious users from entering the environment. And then in terms of protecting the corporate entity from legal situations, the most important thing there is to instill very well thought out and documented procedures. So you need to document all your security procedures and instructions. You need to hold security education for all of your users that have access to mobile devices. They should be educated and informed on how to use those devices, how to ensure that they're protecting not only the device but the information on the device. And all of that stuff should be put in place in terms of policies and procedures around security and communicated and documented. And that will help to protect the organization in a situation where, where something bad does happen. So in summary, again, what's important to the organization is the enterprise data, the sensitive enterprise data, and protecting that data when it goes outside the organization's four walls. That's important. Developing all the appropriate rules and procedures to complement all your mobile processes and the needs of your mobile workforce. That's critical. And that kind of goes in line with what I talked about before, which is, you've got these mobile applications in place for a reason. They're in place to improve processes and make your workers more efficient, and you don't want to compromise that at all. But what you want to make sure of is that those processes are secure and they're not putting your organization at risk. So putting those processes and procedures or rules in place is going to protect everybody. Understanding the real risks of your mobile solution. So what will happen? What are the risks to the organization if you lose data, or if an unauthorized user has access to an application, those types of things? Because you have to assume that they will happen at some point, and you have to be able to put protection in place in case it does. Again, we recommend that you avoid using HTML5 for mobile applications that require high security. HTML5 applications are very well suited for applications that are consumer-facing, that are required, that you wouldn't want to have a high level of corporate data involved in that anyways. But for enterprise applications that need a high level of security, you're really going to want to develop native applications to support the security that you need. And then finally, you want to avoid the tendency to implement security procedures just for the sake of it. So instead of, when you put your policies in place, it really has to mean something to your organization, and every organization is a little bit different. So you need to think about what is important to your organization, what are the risks to your organization based on the sensitivity of the information that's being put at risk, and then put the procedures in place that are going to protect your organization and your people.
Well, thank you so much, Nasrin. It was very informative. Again, anybody that has any types of questions, feel free to go ahead and post them, and we'll address them. There is a question here. Are we going to be getting a copy or a recording of the briefing? As you'll see here, for a copy of the presentation or any other additional information pertaining to Mobile Reach or this specific discussion, our webinar or our upcoming webinar series, please reach out to me, Bob Silver. My email is bsilver@mobilereach.com, and I can be reached here in our Cary, RTP, North Carolina office at 919-336-2500, extension 109. In closure, as you continue to strengthen your security procedures, as we all know, the other side of the fence, those that are trying to break through, will do everything they can. And so it's very important from the ground up to start early and efficiently, not just relying on one layer of security, or if you're relying on that device to secure, you've pretty much already failed already. So if there's any other questions, please post them. Otherwise, we will look forward to seeing you on our next webinar coming up here real soon. We'll send out an invite. But I wanted to just let everyone know, thank you so much. But just to go back, our mobile series, we focus on building mobile apps quickly, efficiently, and securely. We analyze and implement effective mobile workflows. We've discussed why the native apps are the right choice for the enterprise, and today addressing the mobile application security. And our upcoming webinar, we will focus on developing that enterprise mobile strategy, taking into all the different aspects of what we've talked about to this point, and helping deploy a end-to-end mobile strategy. That said, Nasrin, if there's anything else you'd like to add, thank you again for joining on today's webinar. We appreciate it, and we look forward to hearing from each and every one of you. Again, Bob Silver, Mobile Reach, and Nasrin Azari.